We'll stay here. Okay. So I'm Pippa. If you don't know me, I'm part of the leadership team here, and it's a real joy to continue our preaching series this morning. I'm fully embracing the Brittany mic today. I know, it needs a whoop. I'm not going to break out in song, but if I do keep looking this way or like twitching, it's because it feels like there's a bit of a fly on my face, which feels quite weird, but anyway. So a few weeks ago we started a new preaching series called the Jesus Revolution. And we've basically been looking at how many of the moral values that we hold to today, things like equality, freedom, consent, have become kind of so instinctive to us and so familiar to us that we don't always recognize where that's come from or why we live out those values. A bit like the air we breathe, it's all around us, constantly breathing in and out, but we're not consciously aware of it. We're not always thinking about that. And so in a similar way, the moral values we live out today in today's society, we're not always thinking about why we live out those values or where they've come from. And so we've been using a book, which I was going to bring, but I haven't, by Glenn Scrivener, called exactly that, The Air We Breathe, to try and show how the Jesus Revolution of 2,000 years ago has profoundly shaped our moral landscape. And so it's been a bit of a different series. We don't always preach kind of along these topics, but I hope you found it helpful. I hope your discussions in your life groups has been as interesting as they have in the South Leeds group, but it's been fun. And our prayer really through this series is that really we grow in our confidence in the gospel, that it's not outdated or irrelevant, but it still very much speaks into today's morality and into today's world. And I don't know about you, but sometimes when I'm sharing faith or talking to people about Jesus, I can feel a bit embarrassed about it. But actually, we don't need to feel ashamed of the gospel because it still very much speaks meaningfully into today's world. And so our prayer really through this series is that we're encouraged that actually many of our friends who don't know Jesus, our colleagues, our neighbors, they actually believe quite a lot of already of what Jesus taught. And they're probably a lot closer to the Christian faith than what they realize and also what we realize as well. So we hope that this will encourage us to have more conversations, meaningful conversations with our friends who don't know him. And so today we're going to be looking at the value of compassion, the moral value of compassion. I'm going to invite Jesse to come and read for us. I see him. Thanks, Jesse. Could he just have the mic? So this is probably one of the most famous stories in the Bible. It's called the Good Samaritan. It's Luke 10:25 to 37 if you want to follow, but it will come on the screen. Thanks.
On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus said, "Go and do likewise."
Thanks so much. Very familiar story, and we're going to get into it shortly. But I just want to tell you a story that a few years ago, I was at Life Group. I was looking around to see if anyone else was there that night, but they weren't. And we were just chatting away over a cup of tea, having a bit of a catch-up, when we heard this almighty bang. And I even said, it's a bit early in the year for fireworks, isn't it? Although fireworks seem to be all year round now, don't they? And one of the other girls said, that wasn't a firework. And so we ran to the window, opened the curtains and looked out. And across the road from their house, on the other side of the road, there was a car that had flipped onto its side. And so almost instinctively we said to each other, we should go check if they're okay, we should go help. And so we kind of ran over. There was somebody already there, maybe a passerby, who was already helping a young girl get out of the car, the driver's door, vertically and over the top of the car. So one of the guys went and helped. There was another lady in the passenger seat, helped to get out the car. Thankfully, they only had minor injuries, but they were very shaken, very upset. I called the police and started giving details to them. One of the girls ran back to the house to get some blankets to kind of keep these girls warm. And as they sat down on the curb, they sort of explained to us what had happened. And basically, the young girl, with the driver, had only just passed a test a few weeks ago. And she was a new driver, driving along the road, got to this mini roundabout, and this van had been driving up really close to her, really aggressively, like under pressure. And she was turning left at this mini roundabout, and feeling that sort of pressure from behind, from this aggressive driver, she took the corner too fast, lost control, and somehow managed to flip this car on its side. And then the van sped off into the night. And anyway, we stayed with her, we reassured them, and just sat with them until the police arrived and an ambulance arrived, and then thankfully we were able to hand over to the experts. And then had to go back into life group mode after that, which was fun when you're full of adrenaline, isn't it? But maybe as I told you that story, you felt really sorry for those girls. You felt like a real sense of empathy for them, like, oh, that's terrible, that's awful, those poor girls, she's a new driver, and, that van driver, it's like, oh, that's awful, real empathy. Or maybe you're thinking, that's really good what you guys did. You guys did a good thing. You helped someone in need. You did the right thing. You did a good thing. Why do we think like that if we see a situation of need like that? Well, the reason we often respond to need or situations like that is because we know instinctively that we should help. We should help those who are in trouble. We should reach out to them. We should care and stop and attend and ask how people are. I don't know if you've been in a situation like that. Maybe someone fell and you went to help. It's almost instinctive. Your stomach kind of drops and you get this compulsion to kind of assist and help. It's kind of been morally built into us nowadays. But that doesn't mean we are compassionate or that we always stop and help. And to my shame, I can probably tell you way more stories of times when I haven't helped and when I've just walked past. But what it does mean is that we know we should. We should help those who are in need, those who are weak, poor, vulnerable. Whether you're a Christian or not, that value of compassion is in our bones, isn't it? It's in our DNA. It's just what we do. We look out for the weak, the poor, those in need, and the vulnerable. But as Jesus tells this story of the Good Samaritan, it wasn't obvious to the ancient world that compassion was the thing you ought to do. There would have been absolutely nothing wrong with us just shutting the curtains again and carrying on with our life group. There would have been nothing wrong back then for people just to walk right past that injured man in the Samaritan story. You might choose to help, you might choose to stop, but if you're busy and you're on your way to do your duty, then you should go do your duty and not feel guilty about it. We don't know why this guy's sick and crumpled on the road. Maybe he deserves it. Maybe this is what the gods have decided. This is his fate. Who are we to intervene with that? That was an ancient mindset. And in the first century context, mercy, compassion, kindness were not celebrated virtues at all. In fact, the suffering or the lowly were often ignored or even despised. Things like the killing of children, the abandonment of the disabled, and the neglect of the poor were all very common practices back then. And in the first century, a surviving letter from a Roman soldier named Hilarion wrote to his pregnant wife and just casually instructs her, if it's a boy, keep it. If it's a girl, throw it out. I mean, that is shocking to us today, isn't it? It's outrageous, but that was very common practice in those early centuries back then. Even Greek philosophers like Seneca and Aristotle warned against excessive pity, saying it was irrational, saying it was like an emotional weakness. That's how it was in the ancient days. So if that's how it was back then, where does today's instinct of compassion come from then? Because nature doesn't teach us to be compassionate. Nature would say it's the survival of the fittest and therefore the sacrifice of the weakest. Nature would say, don't look after the weak, let the weakest perish so the strong can avail and ascend. This is also what Friedrich Nietzsche, a 19th century philosopher, would teach. He said, pity thwarts the law of evolution, which is the law of selection. In other words, pity is meddling with what am I trying to say here? Pity is meddling with nature. So compassion is messing up that natural order of the survival of the fittest and the sacrifice of the weakest. And so if we're simply part of nature and there's nothing above nature, then what are we to do but live according to nature? And what does nature do? It discards the weak and it selects the strong. But we don't live our lives according to nature, do we? We live as though compassion is better than survival of the fittest. We live by beliefs that you can't actually prove scientifically. You could maybe argue that we're living out this value of compassion that goes against the grain of nature. Perhaps you could even label it a supernatural value. So where does this supernatural value of compassion come from? Well, I want to try and show how the Jesus revolution has shaped this. It's a unique movement that transcends these brutal laws of nature, and I'm hopefully going to use the story of the Good Samaritan to show how Jesus' life, his teaching, and ultimately his death has massively changed our understanding and our thinking about compassion. So let's get into the story then, the Good Samaritan story. So Jesus is engaging with this expert teacher of the law who's trying to test Jesus. And he basically says to him, like, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And in typical Jesus fashion, doesn't give a straight answer, does he? Answers the question with a question. He says, well, what do you think? How do you read it? And so the teacher then quotes the law of Deuteronomy, and he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your strength, your mind. And then he quotes the law in Leviticus and says, love your neighbor as yourself. Now that word neighbor in the Hebrew there means friend, companion, brother. So this teacher would have understood that word neighbor to mean like his fellow countrymen, the Israelite community, the Jewish community around him. That's who his neighbor is, or his understanding of it. And so remember, this teacher's wanting to test Jesus, and he says, wait a minute. Who is my neighbor? Who gets to be loved? And again, Jesus, not giving a straight answer, tells a story in typical fashion, and often does this in the New Testament, tells a parable. And he tells this story of a man who is going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, most likely meaning he was a Jewish man. And he's on his way, we don't know where he's going, but along his road he gets attacked and he gets beaten and robbed and kicked and basically left for dead. And then we read about this priest who also passes along the same road. So this priest would have been like a religious official in the temple, maybe overseeing kind of the sacrifices, that kind of thing. Walks along the same road, sees this bloody, messed up, dying man, desperately in need, and walks straight on by. We need some pantomime interaction here. We need a few boos and hisses. And he walks straight on by. Boo, hiss, yeah. So to us, we would say boo and hiss, wouldn't we? You know, that's outrageous. You can't just leave a dying man. You can't just walk past. Like, that's ridiculous. But again, in that culture, in the ancient world, there was nothing wrong. Absolutely nothing wrong with that priest walking by. You know, we don't know who he is. This priest has got Old Testament ceremonial laws to abide by. You know, there's blood and stuff. You know, it's going to mess him up. It might make him unclean. There's nothing wrong with him passing by. Of course he's going to do that. Completely understandable. And then along comes our Levite, who is also quite a respected figure, maybe not quite as prestigious as our priest over here, a bit more of a teacher. And he comes along the same road, sees this dying, desperate, bleeding, messed up guy, and walks straight past. Q panto. You're getting it. Again, it's what we would respond with, but at the time, nothing wrong with him walking by. And then in comes verse 33, the Samaritan. So the Samaritans are a religious ethnic group from Samaria. They shared roots with the Jews, but really they were seen as kind of the religious outsiders. They didn't get on at all. Jews and Samaritans hated each other. They were seen as the hated tribe of the north. And so this Samaritan, he's not just a stranger, doesn't just know him, but actually they're essentially enemies, this Samaritan and this injured man. And so along he comes, this enemy of this Jewish man looks, sees this battered and bruised, dying man, and it says he took pity on him. Now that word pity in our language is a bit of a weak word, isn't it? Pity. I pity him, I feel sorry for him. I pity the fool, if you like, the A-team. But in the Hebrew, that word pity comes from a root word meaning inward parts, bowels, hearts, emotions. And so this Samaritan was deeply moved in his inner being to feel like a gut-wrenching, stomach-churning compassion for this man. It's the same word, pity, that's often used to describe Jesus' own compassion. So Matthew 9:36, Jesus had compassion on the crowd, same word, pity, gut, emotion. Mark 1:41, Jesus was moved with compassion before healing a leper. And Luke 15:20, the father of the prodigal son is moved with compassion when he sees his son returning. And so this Samaritan who's moved with this gut-wrenching, like heart-aching love and compassion for this Jewish man, it's not just a feeling. He doesn't just feel it and go, oh, that's terrible, and walk off. It takes the form of action, doesn't it? He stops, he attends. He doesn't ask, who is this man? Does he deserve my help? What did he do to deserve it? No, he stops and he attends. And he does three things. He firstly pours out his own resources. So he gets down and he gets his oil and he gets his wine. I think that's going to sting quite a bit. And he bandages this guy up and he gently gets him up and he puts him on his own donkey and he takes him to a nearby inn and he cares for him all through the night. And when he has to leave the next day, he uses his own money. He pays 2 days' wages for the innkeeper to look after him, 2 denarii. And he says, whatever it takes, I'm coming back in 2 days. Whatever it costs, it's covered. I'll pay. He uses his own resource. He gives his time to detour. So we don't know where this Samaritan man was going. Maybe he was on his way to do some business or see his family, but he's willing to be interrupted. And not just for a quick 5 or 10 minutes. Here, there you go. Good luck, see ya, gotta go. No, he gives a whole night of his time caring for this man. He goes away for a couple of days, he comes back, I'm coming back. When I return, he's gonna give more of his time to come check on him and make sure he's okay. And thirdly, he risks his own safety in stooping down to help him. He doesn't know if he goes and helps this guy, maybe there's more robbers or thieves, is he at risk? Will he get attacked as well? Him helping this man with the blood and the guts or whatever, he's putting himself at risk. He's going to make himself unclean by doing this. So this Samaritan, who's an enemy of the injured man, crosses ethnic, religious, and social boundaries. This is costly, isn't it? This is cross-cultural, life-rearranging love. And so when the teacher asked Jesus in verse 36, who is my neighbor? Who do I have to love? Who gets to be loved? Jesus' answer is not what he's expecting at all. Jesus says, your neighbor is the one who showed compassion to the injured guy. Your neighbor is wider than your little circle, your little close-knit community, your Jewish, your little easy-to-love crew. Your neighbor even includes your enemies. You can kind of imagine the gulp in his throat, like, what? What are you saying, Jesus? Jesus is completely redefining neighbor to mean love everyone. Love everyone in need as you love yourself, not just your own people, not just your family, your close-knit community. Love the outsider. Love the weak. Love the marginalized. Love even your enemies. This was radical. This was revolutionary. Of course, other worldviews had love. The Romans loved their own. They loved their children. They had sick bays for their own soldiers to come and recover. But who loves to the very edges of society in an all-sacrificing way? Who loves to that extreme? That was unheard of. This was a radical expansion of compassion that broke boundaries. And in the ancient world, you might well say that the moral of the story might be, don't be that guy. Unlucky, make better choices in life. Don't be the fool guy. And today, the moral of the story may well be, we should all be good Samaritans and show love to everyone sacrificially. And Jesus says in verse 37 at the end, go and do likewise. But that's a hard task, isn't it? Maybe even an impossible task. How do I love like that every minute of the day? I'll try, even just with my close family and my friends. I'm really trying to love here. My boss who's frustrated. I'm going to try. So we can't just try and do this love thing. First, we need to be loved. In order to love strangers and enemies and outsiders, first we need to be loved. We need to see ourselves not as the Samaritan in this story. I think we're so quick, aren't we, to see ourselves as the Good Samaritan, showing love and kindness and mercy to everyone else. But first, we need to see ourselves as the injured man, as the one who needs to be cared for and rescued by the ultimate Good Samaritan, Jesus. See, like the Samaritan, Christ was the outsider, wasn't he? He was despised and rejected, and yet he saw our need. And he comes to us who are weak and desperate and dying, and he rescues us, not because we deserve it, but because of his mercy. Like the Samaritan, God's compassion broke through every boundary, sinner and righteous, Jew and Gentile. God so loved the world that he gave his only son. And like how the Samaritan risked his life to help the injured guy, Jesus didn't just risk his life, did he? He gave his life as a ransom for many. He paid the ultimate cost, dying instead of us. That injured guy was as good as dead until the Samaritan came and gave him a lifeline, rescued him. And we were as good as dead until Jesus, the ultimate Good Samaritan, gave us a lifeline and rescued us from spiritual death. I don't know if you've ever heard that phrase, hurt people hurt people. Heard that before? Well, in a similar way, loved people love people. We need to be loved in order to love. Having been loved in this way, having been shown the mercy and the grace of and the compassion of the ultimate Good Samaritan, Jesus, now go and show compassion to everyone else. First receive, then give. This is the gospel, isn't it? This is actually the revolution that Jesus brought about. A totally undeserving people being shown unconditional grace and love and mercy to then share it with the world. And that's why the early Christians started to show acts of compassion that went against the grain of society, because they'd known his love, his mercy, his compassion. These guys in the early church, they weren't just nice people by nature. They were transformed by the love of God, by the Holy Spirit working in them and changing them, making them look more like him every day, becoming more compassionate. So they received more as his love. They were able to give it away, becoming good Samaritans everywhere they went. See, when we're filled with his love, it's so much easier to love other people, isn't it? And just as I was preparing this week, I just felt like there were some of us who need that fresh touch of his love again. Maybe some of us are just really struggling to love someone at the minute. Maybe it's a work colleague or a boss, a difficult, strained relationship. Maybe it's a relative. Maybe it's in your marriage, it's your spouse. It's so hard to love them at the minute. But Jesus just wants to bring a fresh touch of his compassion for you. Again and again, not just a one-time thing, but go on being filled with his love again and again so that you can love others. It was this love that transformed the disciples and the early church, and it totally changed the world. And as a result, as the gospel spread and the early church grew, that early church and those disciples were known for their radical acts of mercy. And I'll just give you some examples of things that happened in the early centuries. So in the 3rd century, a massive plague swept right across the Roman Empire, and lots of the wealthy citizens, the Romans, just fled and left the sick to die alone. But Christians like Bishop Dionysius, selflessly nursed and cared for the sick, some of them even contracting the disease and dying themselves. Sacrificial love and compassion. Christians provided for widows and orphans and the poor. They took up collections, not just for their own communities, but for those in the surrounding culture, and that was really rare. In the 4th century, there was a man named Basil of Caesarea, it's a good name, and he established an institution called the Basilias, which was basically like the first hospital. It was also a hostel. It was a place where people could come. It's the first picture there. It was also a leper colony. Even things like the cruel practices like blood sports and the gladiatorial games, the killing of offspring, Christians boycotted these things. They opposed them. Christians got in the arena and tried to separate these fights and protest against them and oppose them until gradually these things were outlawed. And over time, hospitals, hospices, charitable systems were introduced, things that the pre-Christian world had not developed at scale, things that wouldn't have existed without the Jesus movement. And it transformed society. We still see the impact of that even today, don't we, with things we take for granted every day like the NHS. But do you know, at first people didn't like it. Christian compassion was seen as a threat to the Roman social order. And there was a Greek philosopher named Kelkus who criticized Christians for associating with the poor and the weak and the marginalized, calling it a religion for fools, women, and children. That made me laugh. You see, where Rome had their distant deity, their superpower of the day, Caesar, Jesus is the complete opposite, isn't he? Christians worshipped a God who took on pain and weakness. He came for the sinners and the lost and the down and out. I love this quote. It's in Glenn's book, Glenn Scrivener. At the crucifixion, a spear was thrust into Christ's side to finish the job. We see two very different pictures of greatness. At one end of the spear is a centurion enforcing imperial right, and at the other end is Jesus, a despised but innocent victim of injustice. You see, kindness appeared in the world because kindness himself appeared. Kindness enfleshed, kindness embodied in the person of Jesus. Jesus, the fittest, was sacrificed for us, the weakest, so that we could live, so that we could be forgiven, so that we could have a chance, a second chance, so we could have life and live to the fullness of him. And then spread that message of love and hope to everyone we meet, all through the world. This was his rescue plan for the world, wasn't it? This was his mission plan. This is compassion at full strength. And it's because of Jesus now. And hopefully I've been able to show that. That's why we why we have this value of compassion, why it's so ingrained into society. It's because of Jesus and what he did and what he taught. And just as we land, I just want to give us 3 different ways that we might want to respond. And maybe you're here today, and it's already been said actually earlier, but maybe you don't know this Jesus, and I want to tell you that he knows you, and he has compassion for you. This value of compassion, it didn't just evolve over time, it arrived in flesh and blood in the person of Jesus Christ, the ultimate Good Samaritan who came for you. And he reaches his hand out towards you today and he asks you, do you want his help? Will you take his hand? And if you want to accept that invitation, his outstretched arm of love and compassion for you this morning, I want to encourage you to talk to someone that you came with. You can come and talk to me after, or one of the other leaders. And I'd love to tell you more about Jesus. I'd love to tell you how he's changed my life and how he can change your life. I want to throw out a challenge as well to all of us. You know, those early Christians were known for their radical acts of mercy. Well, I want to ask us, are we known for our radical acts of mercy in our communities, in our workplaces, in our schools, on campus? Are we known for radical demonstrations of love and compassion and mercy for our colleagues, for our friends, for those in the city who are desperate and in need? Are we as a church, Gateway Church, are we known in this community as a church who are known for their radical acts of mercy and grace and love and compassion? I know I'm not, and I know I need Jesus to change me. And so I want us to kind of finish by just praying with one another, maybe just in 2s and 3s, praying for God to break our hearts with his love again, to experience and encounter his love for us, so that we can then freely give it away to everywhere we go. For him to fill us with his compassion for the lost and the hurting. And sometimes we can look around, can't we? We were having a discussion about this week. Some of the leaders, there's so much need in this city, isn't there? There's so much need in our nation. We need Jesus to come and mobilize his church. We need Jesus to come and change our hearts, to remind us of his love and to fill us with his love and his compassion for others. And so, just before we pray, I just wanted to invite Leslie to do. She had a word this morning that's just fitted really well.
Right, I need you to do something. We have a prophetic action. And in fact, I need to go back down and get mine. Right, if you've got a coat, a jacket, a jumper, a scarf or something with you, can you put it on now?
I think I'm done.
It's just for a minute, Jean. Just keep it on for a minute. Right. Your coat, your jacket, your jumper is the banner of love. It is God's love surrounding you. God loves you, has loved you even before you loved him. There is no one in this room who is excluded from the love of God. So this is a physical presence, if you like, of God's love. He's saying this morning, I love you, and I loved you so much, I died for you. Just take a minute and let that soak in. God loves everyone. There's no exception. God loves everyone in this room. So you have the banner of God's love on you. Secondly, your coat or jumper or jacket is also a picture of the robe of righteousness. If you are in a relationship with Jesus Christ, He has given you a robe of righteousness, and that will never go away. You are righteous before God. And if you don't know Jesus this morning, you can ask Him right now, and you can say, Jesus, I want you to forgive my sin, and I want you to become my Lord and Saviour. Revel in God's righteousness. Revel, enjoy. You are righteous before God. You don't have to do anything to be accepted by God. You are righteous. Revel in your righteousness. Just close your eyes and just think about that. You are righteous before God all the time. All right, open your eyes. Your coat is also your armor. You are wearing God's armor, and you can stand firm against evil. If you want to remind yourself, read Ephesians 6 during the week. So for the rest of this week, maybe the rest of this year, when you put your coat or jacket or scarf or cardigan or jumper on again, remember, God's saying to you today, I love you. He's saying, enjoy, revel in my righteousness. You're wearing my armor, so stand firm. You are loved, you are righteous, and you are ready for battle.
Thank you so much, Leslie, and thank you, Pippa, for an amazing message this morning. If you do want to pray with somebody, please do. You can ask the people you're sitting around, or as Pippa said, please speak to one of us leaders up the front if you want to respond to anything from this morning. We're going to wrap things up there as time is getting on. So if you have children either upstairs or downstairs, please start heading to collect them now. Please don't go